Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We are online, so we're getting started. Welcome, everyone at home. It's a beautiful day outside, but it's a beautiful day to be inside as well. So we're going to start in Acts chapter 27. We have 2 chapters to go to wrap up our study. We're slowly getting there. So we're in Acts chapter 27, wrapping up our study, and hopefully this has been a good study for all of you. It's definitely been a good study for me, and I'm sure for Danny and Kelvin as well. So we get to the end of Paul's missionary journeys. His final destination is Rome, and it says here in the lesson notes that were provided to me that this chapter 27 contains 50 nautical terms found nowhere else in the New Testament. So I don't know much about sailing, and I didn't count 50, but that's an interesting tidbit of how descriptive the Bible is, and Luke recorded a lot of the nautical terms here in this chapter. So we're going to start out with our reading in chapter 27, verse 1. It says, "And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius." So Luke reverts back to the we form here, indicating that he is joining Paul on this trip to Italy and then on to Rome. And picking up in verse 2, it says, "And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for." So we see here that they chartered a vessel. This was not a Roman vessel. This was a merchant vessel. And the ultimate goal was Macedonia, so what today would be Croatia or Bosnia, off to the east coast, or off the east side of Italy. And because of Paul's good character, I'm assuming he was given some liberties by his captors, and he was allowed to visit with others, and so he found favor, likely due to his godly character there in verse 3. Picking up in verse 4, it says, "And putting out to sea from there, we sailed around the under lee," there's a nautical word, "of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off of Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go any further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Samone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fairhaven, which was near the city of Lasea." And so again, they charter a different ship after getting to one point in their destination and continue, but the winds are not cooperating already, and they're having some difficulty getting to where they need to go. So picking up in verse number 9, "Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, 'Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of cargo and ship, but also of our lives.' But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there." So Paul's already been a seasoned traveler of these waters. He's made several journeys in and around this area by boat, and he's giving them his advice that he's learned, which is, hey guys, this is not a good time to sail. It says that it was after the feast, which was probably the Day of Atonement, which would have placed their travel in October. And according to my studies, the dangerous time for that part of the water is September through November. And there's kind of this pre-winter windy season. And so they're right in the middle of that. And if we look at our slides here, so they left Jerusalem up to Caesarea. They sail, and they're making their way, and they're over to Crete at this point. And their ultimate goal is up here. They're trying to reach the coast of Asia. But we'll see what the wind has in store for them. So in verse 13, it says, "Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called a nor'easter, struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along." Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. So they were trying to make it to Phoenix. So they're on Crete here. They're trying to get to here, but the south wind's not cooperating, and then instead of a north wind comes down and blows them away from the island, and they start to drift out here into the Mediterranean. And after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. And when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay upon us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So, like sailors often do, they start to get rid of the non-essential stuff to lighten the boat and try to make it more maneuverable. And that doesn't work. And then it's so windy and stormy and dark that they start to lose hope at this point. And let's see what Paul's response is in verse 21. "Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me, and you should not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship.'" So Paul can't resist the "see, I told you so." He says, you should have listened to me, but you didn't. But take hope. So he gives them encouragement. And so it's not wrong to correct people, but always do it in love, and Paul does that here. And he predicts, or makes a prophecy of sorts, that there would be no loss of life among those, but only of the ship. And let's keep going in verse 23. And he gives them the why. He says, "For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" So Paul says here that, he got a divine revelation from an angel of God that his purpose to appear before Caesar would be fulfilled, and that would protect all of those with him. And he encourages them to take heart and basically shares with them his belief in God. And that's something that's so essential when we go through hard times in our life, because sometimes you look at other people and you think, man, how did they get through that? They just must have that strong character. They're just some personality trait. But when we can point back to God in our faith and say it's God that's getting me through this hard time. It's it's my faith, it's my trust, and lead other people through Jesus, through our storms in life, through our difficulties in life. And I'm sure we've all had those opportunities, and when those come in the future, remember Paul's example. In the midst of a all hope is lost storm in the middle of the ocean, he's pointing people to God. Verse 27, "And when the 14th night had come," so they've been out for 2 weeks in this storm, "and we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea." So let's go to our map here, because I don't know my geography, but Adriatic Sea is up here. So we'll get to why that's important here in a minute. "About midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land, so they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for the day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. So some of these soldiers are ready to man the lifeboats. They're lowering the lifeboat over the edge. They're going to get in there and try to ride out because they are getting that they're in shallow water now. So they're worried they're going to hit something and be broken apart in the storm. And their thought is, if we're in shallow water, maybe we can get to land. But Paul says you have to stay on the ship if you want to be saved. And the centurion trusts Paul at this point. He didn't listen to him when Paul said, don't take off in this weather. But Paul has now earned his trust, and he tells the men to listen and not abandon ship. In verse 33, it says, "And as day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will be to your strength. For not a hair will perish from the head of any of you.' And when they had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food for themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea." And so Paul almost has a communion meal here. He breaks bread, he gives thanks, he shares it, and he reminds them, again, that we've got to stick together here, and then encourages them to strengthen themselves with food. And so that's another important part in trials in life, not to let anxiety overcome you to the point where you lose your strength. You need to re-energize, and Paul does that here with food. And then they throw the rest of it into the sea. They're still nervous. They're still doing what they can to survive here, but they actually get rid of the rest of their provisions to lighten the load. Yeah.
It's almost like earlier when they had down 4 anchors to prepare themselves to not hit the water. They kind of touched on 4 anchors through that whole process. They continue to have community and break bread with each other and still have that togetherness. And then they turned around and they were still having hope and faith. And then at the same time, they were still able to trust in God. So it's almost like 4 different types of anchors that you can think of, that when you're going through things, what do you do? Mm-hmm. And then you just give it up to God. And then also it's like one of the other anchors, not the 5th anchor, but they let go of everything else that they didn't need. It's almost like that sermon somebody preached a few weeks ago from Hebrews 12, when it says we need to lay aside every weight and sin that ensnares us and traps us. Because in doing so, it helps us to have patience through the hard times. Yeah. Because the mean time is going to be a mean time.
Yeah, Amon was saying, for those who couldn't hear, that we have spiritual anchors that hold us in life: faith, hope, trust, love, communion with one another. And there was an old song called "We Have an Anchor" that I used to love singing when I was younger. Yeah, we still sing it today. But we have spiritual anchors in the storms of life, and it's important to use those anchors to keep us from getting tossed about. So great comment. So we're in Acts 27 and verse 39. It says, "Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they had planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and let them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf." So now they finally shipwreck here on a beach, on an area that they don't recognize. It's not their destination, but they're done with the storm, so they cut anchors. They get rid of all the last amount of weight so they can drive the ship into the ground and be out of the water. And verse 42, verse 41, it says, "But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground, and the stern was broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. Why would the soldiers want to do that? What was the penalty for losing your prisoner? You lost your life in return. So their plan was to not die themselves, but to kill all the prisoners so they couldn't escape. In verse 43, it says, "But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land." And so, once you see land in a storm, even if you don't recognize it, they weren't willing to, well, let's see if we can find something better. It was, we have an opportunity, we have an escape, let's take it. And so they destroy their ship purposefully to find land. And again, a spiritual application there. Sometimes we have to let go of things in life to save, our spiritual selves. There's things that we, possessions, or, you have this strong boat. You might think, well, maybe I can keep going. But sometimes you got to beach it and, take the avenue that God's given you to get out of whatever storm you're in. And we see that the prophecy given to Paul by the angel comes true, that they all survived, but the ship was lost, as Paul predicted. And in chapter 28, verse 1, it says that after we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. And this is where there was a little bit of controversy in my study about where they ended up. So whoops, that's not what we were trying to do. Let's go back. This is the island of Malta today. Apparently the original word in the text was an island, Mahita or Melita, which there's several. This used to be called Melita, I guess, but there was also a Melita up here in the Adriatic Sea, which was their destination and which was what they said they were in, or Luke says they were in at one point. He says that they were in the Adriatic Sea. So anyway, I don't know where they landed, but it's possible it was up here. It's possible it was down here. I don't know that it really matters. But that's where they ended up. And so, Amon touched on it here, but this is kind of a salvation story of sorts as Paul is going to Rome. We see that Paul is in the bondage of the Romans, and spiritually we are under the bondage of sin without Christ. Paul faces literal physical storms for 14 days and nights, and we face not only physical but also spiritual storms in our lives, and often the two are tied together. Paul's ship was in darkness, and without God we are in spiritual darkness. They try to jettison as much as they can to save themselves. They're working. Sometimes we try to earn our salvation through work. Sometimes we try to atone for our sins by doing good deeds, or whatever the case may be. But as it was futile for them to save their ship, it's futile for us to earn salvation in any way through works. Paul gives them a message that faith is going to save you, and that's the same message we see in the Bible today. It's by grace we are saved through faith in God, and ultimately their action in faith is rewarded. And again, we are called to take action based in faith, and those works will be rewarded as well. So a neat little corollary there to what Paul went through and what we go through as Christians today. We set out on our own journey, knowing that there'll be some storms in life, and sometimes we get so caught up in those. We can get trapped by darkness, and sometimes people get sunk, metaphorically speaking, by those trials. But again, as you're going through those storms in life, remember the story of Paul and how he not only saved himself but saved others. So let's get into chapter. Well, before I do that, any comments on chapter 27? Did anyone count all 50 nautical terms that were in there? I saw Lee 3 times, so maybe they were counting that 3 times. I was thinking 50 distinct ones. I couldn't find that. Brenda.
The storm comes before you prepare. We need to make sure that our faith is grounded in the Lord, because we don't know when the storm is going to come. And when it does come, you
was that we can't wait for storms in life. We need to be prepared before that so that when they come, we have that foundation to hold us through. Yeah, great point.
Correlations you have there, the way I would look at this more is they initially ignored Paul's advice, and because of that, these things happen. So when I look at that up there, like the whole, jettisoning the cargo is like, well, you got yourself into that situation. Now it's, this is what we try to do is like when we get ourselves in a place that we shouldn't be, because we have ignored what we're supposed to do. And it's jettisoning cargo, like, salvation by works, but we at that point have done what we should not have, and now it's like, oh, we're just trying to, we'll see if we can, work our way out of it, but it's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's not by our own ability to do anything. That's where I take it by this, is it's more of the overall, like, the journey is, the perilousness that's faced is because the advice is ignored.
Yeah, the comment was Wade said that they ignored Paul's initial advice not to set sail, so their actions kind of got them into this difficulty, and in the same way our actions can get us into situations that then by more actions we try to get ourselves out of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Jonah corollary is a good similarity between Jonah's ignoring God and the centurion ignoring Paul's advice and getting himself in trouble. Amon?
Even close investigation to this, because those are 2 points too. But Paul had no choice. He was in prison. He was a prisoner. So he told him, hey, listen, this is the advice, man. So Paul already did what he did to get himself where he is, in a good sense. But the captain still decided to go with Paul. And then, so after they didn't listen to the initial assessment, then when they were there, God said, or Jesus said, listen, I'll be with you still. Just give them the advice not to leave the ship. So sometimes even our leaders and our managers may make the wrong decisions to take you someplace you don't want to go. But God is still with you as long as you remain faithful. And again, I hate to say it, well, I love to say it, Hebrews 12, if we keep our eyes on the cross, that's where our destination is going to be. So he actually didn't have a choice to be there. But in the midst of that situation, God says, look, I know, your boss said the wrong thing, your chief said the wrong thing, the doctor said we should do this, but hey, you're still here, let's push forward and just stay with me.
Yeah, the comment was that Paul didn't really have a say in the matter. He was taken somewhere, and if you've been in the military or any corporate, sometimes your bosses make decisions you don't agree with, but you got to follow them, you got to go that direction, and we can still keep our trust in God, even if we think that, there's a better way to do it. Sometimes you got to, obey your superiors, but still have faith that God can carry you through. I think I saw another hand back here, Kelvin.
Paul's words are his advice was based off experience and not prophetic until at the end, right? That we were able to see that. And so the captain of the ship, the trust of Julius was to the captain of the ship. This is a person who is driving this thing. I have to put more trust in him, to a sense, than someone else just giving me advice, right? And so I look at that in a different light. Because Paul, as you mentioned before, was an experienced person in the open sea. He had been shipwrecked. He's seen these things. So it was based off experience, not necessarily prophetic messaging.
The point there was that Paul was not giving prophecy when he was giving his own opinion when he said, October's not a good time to set sail, guys. So.
6 talked about John, he made it there, and this was after the what was it that
the feast
fire? They came out of the fire and John was armed, something like that. Did you read that already?
Oh, we haven't gotten that far
Oh,
yet.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm reading into it in Malta.
Yeah.
In Malta, people were like, oh, we thought he was a god. But basically, we were saying earlier that they were coming down and they ended up in Malta. But you mentioned something, I'm just curious, you mentioned about another island that was more interior, it's called Malta. And you were saying that you weren't sure if they landed
Well, it says their ultimate destination was a port in Asia. So
Yeah.
port in Asia. We have to go back here. Again, I don't know that it matters, but Asia's over here.
Yeah.
This is their destination that they're trying to get to. They're trying because they're on a chartered boat. So the boat is not going to Rome. The boat's going this way
Yeah, into the Adriatic.
in the Adriatic Sea. And there is a Melita Island up here. So that may have been, once they get there, then they find another boat that's going to get them over to Italy, and from Italy to Rome. But whether they landed here or up here,
Yeah.
scholars can spend time writing doctorates about where they think it was.
That's great.
Yeah. But yeah, let's get into what happened on Malta. So in chapter 28, it says, in verse 2, the native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened onto his hand. And when the native people saw that the creature was hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer. Though he had escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead, but when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. And so the native people show them kindness. They're taking care of them, and as Paul's helping out to build a fire, he gets bit by a poisonous viper. And again, scholars think that this was a horned viper, which is not native to South Malta, but is native to this other Melita island. And it can cause hemorrhagic edema, so your blood vessels just burst and swell up, and then that causes you to go into shock and die. And so that is a good description. They're waiting for him to swell up and drop dead. That's edema and shock. And that does not happen. They assume that justice, it says justice with a capital J, so that's one of their gods, the goddess of justice. This was a Greek god, and they assume because he was a prisoner that now this god is punishing him and he's going to get what he deserves. But when that doesn't happen, he gets elevated from dirty murderer to potentially a god. And this may have been a way of God showing, why does Paul get bit by a viper? I mean, why do we have this story? It could just be further proof that God is with Paul, that this, uniformly fatal snake bite, Paul comes through unscathed because he is innocent and God is with him. I don't know, that's my thought. Any other thoughts here? Anybody ever been bit by a snake?
It's always time.
Amen.
So you could be in hardship, this, that, and the other, and be concentrated on one area, but the ability to promote God will present itself, and instead of blowing it off, just continue working in that direction.
Yeah, great point. And another thought is, this is Satan trying to keep Paul from his destination, because that's what Satan does. He tries to stop, those who are serving God, and no doubt Satan knows the importance of Paul reaching Rome, and a storm, a shipwreck, a viper bite, nothing's going to stop Paul as long as God is with him, and he has that faith in God.
Or the greeting ministry, if you want to call it a ministry, how they show unusual kindness to strangers. Do we do the same thing when we meet strange things that we're not accustomed to? Do we show kindness to it, or do we show resistance, hate, anger, or anything of the difference?
Yeah. Great point. And let's pick up in verse 7. It says, now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery, and Paul visited him and prayed, and putting hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. So as the apostles often did in how Jesus did his ministry, is not only did he meet their spiritual needs, but he healed physically those that had needs. And Paul, and perhaps Luke as well as a physician, helped heal these people of their different diseases. and they spent some time there with them. And when they were ready to depart, again, because of their good deeds, they were rewarded with everything they needed. The locals gave them everything they needed to set sail. And so in verse 11, it says, "After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria with the twin gods as a figurehead. And putting in at Syracuse, we sailed there for 3 days. And from there, we made a circuit and arrived at Reglium. And after 1 day, a south wind sprang up. And on the second day, we came to Puteoli. Then we found brothers, and we were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome." And so Paul finally reaches his destination there in Rome. And that fulfills, kind of his mission. And we see that in several verses. In Acts 27, he was given, as we just read, a message from an angel that he would go to Rome. And in Acts chapter 1, Jesus predicts that they would take the message from Judea into Samaria and then to all ends of the earth. And in Acts chapter 23, which we looked at a few weeks ago, Paul got a vision directly from Jesus saying that he was going to go to Rome to testify about Jesus. In Acts chapter 19, verse 21, he speaks that he must go to Rome. And so multiple times Paul has given divine revelation that you are going to Rome, and now he finally gets there. And this kind of fulfills away the prophecy that you will take this to the ends of the earth. So this is the Roman Empire at its peak, covering Asia, Africa, and Europe. So all 3 of those continents are under Roman control. So all of the known world, essentially, is under Roman control. And if you're able to spread Christianity outward from there as people from Rome expand the empire, Paul didn't physically take the message to all these places, but by teaching those who were in that area, the gospel now spreads out. And if you, in the Air Force, excuse me, the term force multiplier. Kelvin's nodding his head, I'm on. That was the buzzword back in the day, being a force multiplier. Paul was a spiritual force multiplier. And it's just an amazing story how one man could take, well, we say one man, but he had companions, Luke, Barnabas, and others. But how a small group of people, with God's help, kind of like multiplying loaves and fishes, can spiritually multiply and spread the word to the entire known world. And so Paul was uniquely set up for this with his education, his upbringing, and then his zeal for God, and then his location. And so, just another spiritual application that, don't get discouraged. Sometimes it may seem like we're doing something small, but we don't know what God's going to be able to do with that.
Here, Paul was told that no harm would come to him in Jerusalem, so he knew that he was going to go to Jerusalem. He was told that he was going to go to Rome, and I'm sure Paul wanted to go up there, probably had prayed that he wanted to go there. I don't think Paul expected to be arrested by the Romans and become a Roman prisoner himself, Roman Caesar, which kind of tells us that God answers our prayers, but maybe not in the way that we really think that we want it done. He's got his own agenda. God's got an agenda with Paul. There are numerous people out there willing to kill Paul in a heartbeat from the Jewish nation. So he gets him arrested. So now he's escorted by the Romans. He's protected. This is the best situation. He gives him several months with his guards and everybody else, which I'm sure is going to let their Roman know up in Rome that, hey, this guy's no attempt to get away. He helped everybody out. He's got God on his side. Really a nice guy, which gave him his end result. He had free reign in his own house, prison house, but there at Rome. So instead of being locked away in a dungeon, not spread the word. He has set him up with this whole thing to where he can have free but in order to do exactly what God wants him to do and still be protected by the Roman people.
Yeah, so the comment was that, Paul, his first choice may have not have been, most likely was not to go to Rome as a prisoner. He probably would rather have gone as a free man. But because he was a prisoner, he had his transportation taken care of. He had his food taken care of. He didn't have to, work to raise money for this. This was an all-inclusive trip. And he was protected along the way. And then given free reign, as we'll see here in a minute, in Rome to peacefully spread the word. So let's see what he does in Rome in verse 17. And after 3 days he called together, so he's only gotten there, and now 3 days later he's already calling a meeting, of the local leaders of the Jews. And when they had gathered, he said to them, "Brothers, though I had done nothing against our people or customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. And when they had examined me, they wished to set me at liberty, because there was no reason for the death penalty in my case. But because the Jews objected, I was compelled to appear to Caesar, though I had no charge to bring against my nation. For this reason, therefore, I have asked to see you and speak with you, since it is because of the hope of Israel that I am wearing these chains." And so, as his custom is, he goes first to the Jews and explains to them why he's here, because there may have been some rumors that reached them before he did that, he had blasphemed, their faith and was speaking against their religion, and he wanted to, first squash all of those rumors and say, look, I've done nothing, objectionable against our culture or against our Jewish laws, and in fact, I didn't even bring a countersuit against them. I forgave them. I'm a willing prisoner here for Christ. And in verse 21, it says, "And they said to him, 'We have received no letters from Judea about you, and none of the brothers coming here have reported or spoken any evil about you, but we desire to hear it from you what your views are for regard to this sect. We know that everywhere it is spoken against.'" And so they've heard of the way, or Christians. They want to hear what Paul's opinion is, because they have heard rumors that were contrary to it. And so in verse 23 it says, "When they had appointed a day for him, they came to him at his lodging in greater numbers. From morning till evening he expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the laws of Moses and from the prophets. And some were convinced by what he had said, but others didn't believe." And so, for a while here, he from morning till evening, he does nothing but tells them what has happened to him, what happened with Jesus, preaches to them the gospel. And some of those seeds grew. Some people believed, but not everybody believed what he said. In verse 25 it says, "And disagreeing among themselves, they departed after Paul had made one statement. 'The Holy Spirit was right in saying that your fathers, through Israel the prophet,'" and then he quotes here, "'go to the people and say, you will indeed hear but never understand. You will indeed see but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them.'" That's a hard thing to hear. It's hard to take criticism, right? None of us do that well, I'm sure. And as they're trying to understand this, he points back to Isaiah and says, "Look, this is what God said would happen. It was going to be difficult for y'all to understand and accept this new teaching." And he lost some of them at that because they were unwilling to change their heart. And so, again, our job is just to plant seeds. Some will reject it by choice, and some will reject it because of the hardness of their hearts and not wanting to change their ways. So let's wrap it up here. "Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen." He lived there for 2 whole years at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. And so for 2 years he, as was mentioned earlier, is under house arrest essentially, but he's able to have guests, he's able to teach, and he does that for 2 years unrestricted. Historical extra-biblical texts state that Paul was initially freed after his trial before Caesar, that Caesar found him innocent and freed him, and he stayed in Rome continuing to preach, now as a free man. And then, 4 to 5 years later was rearrested and then eventually executed. But that's a total of around 35 years of Paul's life spent in missionary work, teaching through trials, through travels, through adversity. And the lesson notes talk about, one of Paul's letters saying that he, fought the good fight. And we can see from just, this encapsulation of his work written by Luke, not even looking at all the letters he wrote, some of them from Rome to other churches, what satisfaction it must have been for him to, to face death with no fear, knowing that he literally poured out his life for God and fought that good fight. So let's look at some takeaways here. Be diligent in your work. Paul was diligent. He worked for at least 35 years. Have faith that God will carry you through those storms in life. The storms are going to come. One of my things that I do is I treat allergies, and I when people are allergic to pollen, I tell them you can't control the weather, and spiritually we can't control the spiritual weather. Storms are going to come. Sunny days are going to come too. We got to have faith in God to get through those hard times. Be like Paul and letting your light shine in all circumstances, so that they can see your good works but give glory to God. When Paul was called to God, he didn't accept that. He pointed people back to the God. Don't think that I'm just one person. Again, look what Paul and a small group of people were able to do. Change the religion of the world from paganism through Christianity becoming the dominant religion in the known world within a very short amount of time. Work with a companion. I threw in there. There might be some better companions than others. If you ever get sick, you might want to have a doctor with you. But work with somebody, and Paul does that. Paul takes people with him. He encourages other people to work together. It's easy to get discouraged by yourself. We saw that with the prophet Elijah. It's easy to feel like you're the last one left. But if you have someone else with you, Amon said he'll save his comment for the end. The church is still writing the book of Acts today. So, even though Paul eventually is executed, that's not thrown in there because this is kind of maybe an optimistic way of ending the book. That the Acts is still ongoing. We're still apostles today of God, and we're still taking that message to the world. And so, work hard, finish the race, receive the reward. Any comments? Got 1 minute left. All right. Well,